I'm Jumana Karachi in Istanbul, and this is CNN.
An hour to go of trading, and this is what the market looks like on an historic day as the Fed takes drastic measures. The markets are sharply all over the place, where the Dow is now up 270 points, had been down, has been up for most of the session. The markets turned negative during Powell's presser taking place, but what a day it is. The Fed has taken drastic measures. The first 75 basis point hike in nearly 30 years. And a warning from Powell. Another such hike could be on the way. In Europe, also worrying times. The ECB holds an emergency meeting. You'll hear from a member of the Governing Council, Portugal's central banker, on this programme tonight. And here in Lisbon, Portugal's preparing for the summer tourism rush. On tonight's programme, the CEO of TAP, the national airline, and the mayor of Lisbon. We are live in Lisbon. It is Wednesday. It is June the 15th. You're most welcome to the Portuguese capital. I'm Richard Quest, and here I mean business. Good evening from Lisbon, where I'm on assignment for World of Wonder. But the nature of the day and the events in the markets clearly mean we have to be with you tonight. The Fed has turned and sounded the alarm in the fight against inflation. The Fed's raised interest rates by 75 basis points, 0.75%. Now the idea of a 0.75% rate rise had only come on the agenda in the last 2 weeks or so, as the latest inflation numbers showed it to be the worst in 40 years. The markets betwixt and between. We need to understand why. They're higher now at the moment. You can see the Nasdaq is higher by 2%. It's all begging the question, why should they be up when rates are going up even further and faster and more aggressively than previously thought? The Fed has turned up the dial as inflation has proven to be persistent, or to use the phrase, sticky. The first rate rise, which was expected and was a mere 25 basis points, that happened in March. Inflation was already 8.5% by that point. It needed to move faster, and then revealed a 50 basis points rise in May. Said more hikes of that size were expected. FSIP.
The current picture is plain to see. The labor market is extremely tight, and inflation is much too high. Against this backdrop, today the Federal Open Market Committee raised its policy interest rate by 0.75 percentage point, and anticipates that ongoing increases in that rate will be appropriate.
Rahel Solomon's with me in New York. Rahel, the decision to go, there's two aspects I want to talk to you about. Firstly, the decision to go for 75 basis points, 3/4. It only came on the agenda pretty much in the last week to 10 days.
Exactly. And we heard Chairman Powell essentially say just that, right? That we knew all along they were going to be data dependent. But what we heard is that after Friday's very hot inflation report, which showed that inflation, consumer inflation, was spreading across industries, becoming more sticky, and also accelerating, that perhaps changed the calculus for the Federal Reserve. Also, we got PPI numbers yesterday, producer price index, essentially factory level inflation, also showing some moderation, but certainly not an improvement in inflation. So I think, the Fed has said all along that it would be data dependent, and sort of backing that up today in terms of what we saw, because of course the expectation prior to Friday's report was that we would see 0.5%, and even that was dramatic and historic. But today sort of suggesting that they are responding to what they're seeing, and that essentially being that inflation is not moderating.
Okay, but Rahel, the Fed is also suggesting that there could be another half a three-quarter percentage point. I mean, we pretty much know that the next rate rise will be at least half a point. It could be more.
Well, it's an interesting point because I heard two things from Powell. At one point, he said, you know, do not expect that 75 basis points will be common. But then a few minutes later, he said that he did expect 50 to 75 basis points, or 0.5% to 0.75%, to be appropriate for at least the next meeting and perhaps the meeting after that. So I think, look, I think the last meeting, they perhaps made a mistake in boxing themselves in terms of what we would see this meeting. I'm hearing both things, right? That it won't be common, but it would be perhaps appropriate for the next meeting. And Richard, I want to circle back to something you said, because it's so interesting, just very quickly, in terms of what we're seeing in the markets. Why would markets surge perhaps on the news of raising rates? And I talked to an analyst yesterday about this very thing, and essentially what she said is, you know, the market would prefer a recession over inflation sticking around. Inflation being as hot as it is, that's sort of scarier than the prospect of a recession. Investors know how to handle a recession. Inflation like this, that's a bit scarier.
All right, but that still means that there'll be a dramatic slowdown in economic growth. And I'm guessing that, you know, I mean, you and I have talked before, a number of economists who say a recession is not their base scenario. I'm guessing a recession becomes the base scenario much more frequently now because of these moves.
It's becoming more likely, and I think it's certainly becoming more likely as we see the Fed having to do more, right? And of course, what we're essentially talking about here is that the Fed is going to have to be more aggressive in terms of curbing demand. And so that means that what we're seeing in the economy won't be as gradual, perhaps, as they would like, won't be as smooth as they would like. So even if you think about actually a plane sort of making a landing, right, you sort of hope for a smooth landing, but it's appearing to be, even best case scenario, Richard, a bumpy landing.
All right. Rahel Solomon in New York, who will continue to watch matters. If we factor in today's moves as against previous Powell Fed decisions and movements, you can see that they are dialing up the inflation, if you like, barometer, as it proves to be more persistent, or sticky is the word. The first rate hike was 25 basis points in March. Inflation was already 8.5%. But that wasn't enough. They could now see they'd have to move faster. Then 50 basis points in May. And they said more of those rate hike sizes would be expected in the future. And then inflation picked up again, 8.6%, worse for 40 years, and the Fed has dialed up even more. So 75 basis points. Randall Krosner is with me, former Fed governor, now professor of economics at the University of Chicago. Look, I'm not going to use the word panic, but I am going to say that they have broken the glass on that button on the wall that says emergency, and this is now a full 5-alarm fire.
The hawks have spread their wings. It's now very clear that they have gotten religion on inflation and are doing what I think they need to do to make sure that inflation expectations don't get out of control. I think that really pushed them to move so much was not really the higher inflation print at the end of last week. That was broadly in line with their expectations, but inflation expectations moved up quite a bit. And that's really scary to them, because once inflation expectations go up, it's very hard to bring them back down.
Right. However, they say the committee is strongly committed to returning inflation to its 2% objective. When you have to tell people, and you know, they're not just committed, they are strongly committed. I mean, when you have to say that, methinks you doth protest too much.
Well, clearly, they made a mistake last year in talking about transitory for much too long. And I think, to their credit, they said, yeah, we didn't get that right, and so now we have to move rapidly. They have to move more rapidly now because they didn't get it right then, but at least they've acknowledged the problem and are moving forward expeditiously, which I think is really important.
What do you believe is the neutral rate where we top out? Now, 3.4% I see is on the dot plot. That is considerably higher than it was a year ago. So we are looking at what number, do you think?
So, and they said that they might even get to 3.8 or maybe close to 4% in 2023. And so that's significantly above what they consider neutral, which is probably in the range of around 2.5%. That's very much an art rather than a science of figuring out where that is. But they know that they need to move significantly above where they think neutral is in order to bring inflation down.
And the R word, recession. I mean, I know it's not inevitable, and I know it's not baked in, but are you prepared to say it's more than likely?
A significant slowdown is very likely, and I think the numbers they put out in their projections are a little bit too rosy. They have the unemployment rate only going up to 4.1%. It's at 3.6 now. I find that hard to believe that it's only going to go up that much. I think it's going to go up significantly more. Whether we'll have a formal recession of 2 quarters in a row of contraction, not so sure about that. But that we're going to have much slower growth and I think a much higher unemployment rate, I think that's certain.
So how long, one of the questions people continually ask, and I think this is because, you know, A, we haven't had a bear market, a proper bear market for many years, and B, the market falls that we saw in the pandemic reverse themselves within a matter of weeks. How long from experience do you think it's going to take to bring inflation down to something that the Fed will consider acceptable?
I think it's going to be a while. This is not something that's happening in the next 6 months. I think even by their own projections, they still could see inflation quite elevated by the end of this year, and it's really only by the end of 2023 that it comes close. So I think you're going to see inflation come down significantly from the 8% or so that we're at, but at still, even if it's half of that, that's almost triple what it's been over the last decade, and double of what their goal is. So I think it's going to take a while. It's going to take at least a year, probably more, for it to come close to.
The Fed's credibility is on the line here, hence that phrase in the statement tonight, strongly committed. Isn't the risky area once inflation gets down to 4.5%? What do you do then? I mean, Powell has said, you know, basically, we'll take no truck, we will push on. Is that realistic to push on, to get down to 2% if unemployment is rising and the economy is stagnant?
This is precisely why they've got to move really fast now. He's used the phrase expeditiously. The unemployment rate's below 4%. The economy is still doing okay. This is the time to be raising rates significantly, because if he raises them much faster now, that probably means they don't have to raise them quite as much down the line, because inflation expectations will not become unanchored. And that's the game that they're playing. Move quickly now, even though it's going to take a while for the inflation to come down, but then people will believe that it's going to come down, wage demands won't stay as high, and that'll make it easier to have a soft-ish landing, maybe just a very significant slowdown rather than a formal recession.
Randall, thank you for helping us understand from Basel exactly what's been going on. I'm grateful for you tonight. And as we continue, we are in Lisbon, which is also a very appropriate place to be today because, of course, there's been problems with the euro and with the ECB. We'll talk about that. You're going to hear from the central bank chief, who's a member of the governing council of the ECB. You're going to hear from Mario Centeno, who's also given his projections today. The mayor of Lisbon, Carlos Moedas, is with us to talk about the success of the city, dealing with success at a time of crisis, and the CEO of TAP, the national airline, Christine Roumier-Widner, is going to be with us to talk on that. All from Lisbon, as Quest Means Business, or Quest Means Lisbon tonight.
Egypt is diversifying its energy mix and extending its pioneering strategy to every part of the country. Through working in partnerships, Egypt aims to provide 42% of its electricity from renewable energy by 2035. The country is successfully transitioning to more sustainable sources, creating green jobs, and powering a more sustainable future.
A Advancement, adaptation, new Marketplace Middle East.
From digital banking to biometric payments, we take a look at innovation and technology in the future of finance.
Marketplace Middle East, Saturday on CNN.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
Heard it all before, but have you heard it like this?
The ultimate disruptor looks set to shake up our world. What's really going on?
Fast-paced news, in-depth reports, and fact checks from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Tonight on CNN.
The Roots, Yolanda Adams, Earth, Wind & Fire, and so much more. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom, live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
The European Central Bank, the ECB's Governing Council, held an emergency meeting. Extremely unusual to be doing this. And they're addressing bond yields and the differential between those countries at the bottom, like Germany, and those with rising yields, like Italy. The ECB has unveiled plans to raise rates. Now, they're going to actually raise interest rates not until next month. It'll be their first hike in 11 years. The danger of raising rates, of course, is that it attracts investors into the bonds of the stronger countries like Germany, France, and obviously the Netherlands, and it has great crisis for those like Italy, Spain, and Greece. The ECB, which is still reinvesting its runoff bonds, remember they've been buying bonds like Billio for years too, is promising flexibility. And they're going to address the yield spread. It says it will accelerate the completion of the design of a new anti-fragmentation instrument. Anna Stewart is with me in Paris. Fragmentation is the word to use to describe the fragmenting of bond yields, those with higher, those with lower. The likelihood is that Italy's yield differential will go beyond 2.5%. So what will they do and why does it matter?
This was the big fear, and I think this is really, in recent days, what sparked this move. An extraordinary move from the ECB. They do not call ad hoc meetings lightly. But what was announced today, Richard, as you pointed out, really wasn't that surprising or even new. So they're going to reinvest some of those proceeds from their PEP, that was the big QE program for the pandemic, reinvest some of that in a flexible way, i.e. they could target some of the government bonds of the economies who are struggling there or the yields are very high. That we already knew. They'd already committed to that. And we didn't get any more information about when or how. And then there's this anti-fragmentation tool. Again, no detail.
But Anna, the whole point here is you have a single currency and now you have to gerrymander the bonds within it. I mean, it's not a crisis in the same sense as it was during the sovereign debt crisis, but the critics will say this is evidence that the system does not work.
It is, because what is the mandate of the ECB? Is it price stability? Is it financial stability? And can you target both in an environment of slowing economic growth, high inflation, and coming off the back of this huge quantitative easing program? Is that possible? Frankly, it's looking pretty tricky. And it's interesting today, the big division between economists who feel, on the one hand, looking at that yield spread, looking pretty worrying, harking back a little bit to sort of the sovereign debt crisis, wanting more action. And then the others, Richard, who say the ECB has been pumping far too much money, buying way too many bonds. And some of those economies with big debt loads, like Italy in particular, haven't really done enough. And at what stage do you just accept that the ECB has artificially depressed bond yields? When are you going to let them rise?
A very, very good point, considering, of course, that they're going to now offer more support to some countries with higher yields. Anna Stewart, who's in Paris tonight. Here in Portugal, of course, the Bank of Portugal and the country was one of those that benefited from assistance during the great financial crisis. Today, the Bank of Portugal is warning of inflation and supply chain issues that it says will curb growth. Today, the Bank of Portugal brought out its own economic forecast. It's a similar story across southern Europe. Its downgraded outlook for next year and the warning stagflation is going to hit Portugal. Now, earlier in the week, I interviewed Mario Centeno. He's the head of Portugal's central bank. He's a particularly influential central bank governor on the governing council. He used to be the president of the Eurogroup, so he knows his way round European crises. Now, although he didn't discuss in detail, or indeed even admit then in our interview, what the ECB was going to do, he was certainly very aware that something was on the cards to help the weaker economies.
We are discussing these new instruments and we are debating them for whenever they are needed. We do whatever it takes, because the sentence is still quite lively in our debates at the ECB. We now have a strong reliance on the flexibility of reinvestments under the pandemic emergency program. These reinvestments are huge. They are quite substantial, and they will be used to prevent the sort of widening spreads that you mentioned. So I expect us to be quite active in that front as well, and to be quite determined to fulfill our duties also with respect, because that has to do with the transmission mechanism. If there is no transmission mechanism operating for monetary policy is useless.
I am familiar with the central bank finance minister IMF phrase, we can reach a soft landing. But nobody really believes it. There's going to be a recession, isn't there? At what point do people like you, I mean, Governor Bailey of the Bank of England's basically said it to the UK. At what point do people like you say, get ready, there will be a recession?
That's a very strong statement to make at this stage, also due to uncertainty. It's in our severe scenario, right, at this stage. So we don't have it in our baseline. The baseline is a very low growth scenario, quarter on quarter, a mixture of negative and positive, both small but still quarter on quarter growth rates. But the baseline is not yet one of a recession. So we must deal with it as all central banks do. It's part of our risk analysis, but not of our baseline scenario.
Whether it's a technical recession or not doesn't matter. Essentially, you're agreeing that you're going to bounce around zero for the foreseeable, for some time. Do you have a duty to tell people and to prepare people for difficult economic times ahead?
No, definitely we do, definitely. And we need to communicate how we consider that it's best for these people, to labor, to firms, to adapt to a difficult situation. It is true, for sure, that the period of low-cost money is gone. This was actually something that we intended and we wanted to do with this normalization process. We just need to deal with the instruments that we have available to stabilize the economy, so to avoid this sort of recession that you mentioned. being part of the risk analysis, we need to deploy the instruments to avoid that. We were quite successful in the context of the COVID crisis to have an economic crisis morphing into a financial crisis. We need and we must show the determination so that the same thing is possible now.
That's the Governor of the Bank of Portugal talking to me earlier in the week. Questions Business tonight from Lisbon on a day when the Fed raised interest rates by the highest amount since 1994. And look at the markets. Perversely, investors like it. We need to delve further. Questions Business.
Wherever you go in the world, one airline goes further to make it feel exceptional. Qatar Airways, going places together.
Bring the energy.
Welcome to the draft.
Aramco Team Series London goes to Team Callum.
3 pros, 1 amateur. Let's go.
We decided a few years ago to set out on a journey which we call Enable a Fossil-Free Living Within 1 Generation. And you can see all around Europe that the competitive situation is shifting away from fossil fuels and into renewables and into more nuclear power. So you can see that there's a lot of innovation going on around the fossil-free technologies, and you can also clearly see that the customer demand is shifting. And today I think we can see that companies and customers are actually moving much faster than nations or global initiatives. So I think that this is a business strategy for us. It's not a sustainability strategy first and foremost. It's a business strategy and it is sustainable, but we can clearly see that through this transformation, we are actually getting increasingly competitive.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Beautiful late spring, summer, early summer evening here in Lisbon, and the view from the Ritz Four Seasons Hotel from the balcony here, absolutely glorious, all the way down to the river, the statue, magnificent evening. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, and it's coming up to 8:30 at night. Our top story tonight: central banks on both sides of the Atlantic taking emergency action to help stave off more trouble in the future. In the case of the Fed, it's raising interest rates. As for the ECB, it's dealing with a crisis in bond yields, which threatens to blow up. Here too, the fear of economic slowdown in Portugal is very real. The country has seen its share of ups and downs. For centuries, of course, this country has been a colonial powerhouse. Now in the EU, having faced tremendous economic problems, there's a new spirit and a new understanding. But can it all be thrown off by the latest economic woes?
It was an empire that once stretched around the globe. Portugal's prowess at sea, epitomized by explorers like Vasco da Gama, led the country to establish colonies from Brazil to India. At home, spectacular castles once hosted the elite fighting units of the Crusades, the Knights Templar, still at the center of conspiracy theories like the one told in the Da Vinci Code.
Whether they blackmailed the papacy or the church bought their silence, no one knows, but it is a fact. The papacy declared these priory knights, these Knights Templar, of limitless power.
Commerce Square is the traditional gateway, if you will, for Portugal's trading past. And whilst the country's world dominance has obviously waned, some things really are still there. The relationship with the water, the river to the ocean, still crucial, not just for trade, but for another T, tourists. Portugal's beautiful coastline makes it one of the most popular destinations in Europe. It attracts everyone from surfers to sunbathers to sun-seeking retirees. Before the pandemic, the World Travel and Tourism Council said tourism accounted for 17% of the country's GDP. With the borders reopened and a travel-hungry public, visitor numbers are bouncing back quickly. As the summer has arrived, so the tourists are coming back in large numbers. Lisbon, like so many European capitals, is feeling the full force of success. Part of Portugal's allure has always been the finer things, like delicious port wines and the gorgeous local tiles. They form significant exports. But no visit to the country is complete without sampling the signature pastry, the pastéis de nata. I'm told that it's well worth queuing up for these particular tarts. It's an egg custard wrapped in puff pastry. Well, the description doesn't really do it justice. Look at that. The natas may be the most tasty part of the exports, but the economy hasn't been built on custard tarts alone. Instead, think wine, port, and other tasty treats. For Portugal, it's not all custard tarts and sweetness. The country suffered heavily during the European sovereign debt crisis. Its deficit soared, and Lisbon received a $92 billion bailout from Europe and the IMF in 2011. Policies imposed then brought years of high unemployment and strict austerity. By 2018 and 19, the economy had finally found its feet again. Things were truly looking up, only to be crushed back down again by COVID-19.
There is an excitement and a vibrancy here in Lisbon. The extraordinary thing about the Portuguese is how they have weathered such economic difficulties. First with the financial and sovereign debt crisis, and then of course more recently with the pandemic. But what it's left them is a resilience and a determination that in the future they're going to get it right. Now, a new mayor took office in Lisbon last year, first time he'd stood. He broke 14 years of socialist mayors and he's tasked with leading the post-pandemic recovery. He's Carlos Moedas, he's the mayor of Lisbon. Mr. Mayor, come and join me. That's lovely to see you. Good to have you. So, first of all, you've got to prepare the country, or the city, for what's going to be stagflation and very difficult times. What do you see as your role in that?
So this is a fantastic city. It's a very resilient city. And I was in the government back with the crisis, the financial crisis. So I know what we have to do. And what we have to do is to invest more in innovation, more in culture, and becoming Lisbon that spot of the innovation of Europe, which I think it's a huge opportunity for the city. And it's something that I can do. I was a European Commissioner for Science to get and create jobs in this new economy.
How do you invest at a time of what could be recession, whether it's technical or not. It's going to be a hard time. Where are you going to find the money?
So we have the Next Generation Europe money, so we're investing that money not just in innovation but also in social housing. I mean, it's very important to understand that this city works because you protect the very poor. We have 60,000 people basically in the city that really live in social housing. So we are investing more on that social housing, protecting people, giving them the opportunity to live well and have this social protection that is very typical of our country.
You have one problem, which is a problem that others would like to have. It is a problem of success. Lisbon is hot. Lisbon is popular. As a result, there are two aspects here. Firstly, people can't find places to live. The Portuguese are kicked out because there are so many retirees, especially from the United States, who are coming to live here. And secondly, you've got tourists galore. How are you going to handle that?
We have a very diversified economy. So tourism is 25% of our economy in Lisbon, but then you have services 20%, we have financial services 15%. So we try to diversify, and technology is today attracting a lot of people that come as tourists, but then they stay. So my point here, Richard, is that I want people to come, and then I want them to stay, to create their companies, to create jobs. And that's what I'm working every day, is to get those people that open companies in Lisbon, and they stay in Lisbon. All these nomads and digital economy that comes to Lisbon, it's good for the companies and it's good for
But it's raising property prices. Expats arriving is pushing up property prices quite dramatically, and the place is packed. How are you going to deal with over-tourism? The sort of things that, you know, Barcelona's faced, Amsterdam's faced, Madrid has faced. How do you prevent yourself turning into the same?
We have to invest in housing, and housing is very important for the city. So we're putting a lot of housing, not just for the poor, but for those like teachers, policemen, that cannot afford anymore to live in the city. So I'm actually doing that to have more public housing in Lisbon, and we're investing heavily on that. And that's absolutely crucial. Then you have to understand that a lot of this economy, like the 25% that we have in tourism, that's almost 40% of employment in Lisbon. So we have to keep tourism. Tourism is important for the city, is important for the economy, and so it's a very important part of my job, is to keep good tourism. People like you coming and enjoying it, but at the same time finding opportunities for the ones
How
that
do
are
you stop
very poor.
over-tourism?
We don't want to stop tourism.
No, over-tourism.
Over-tourism.
How do
But
you stop it?
we are very far from that. Look, every day in Lisbon, the population goes up by 8% with tourists. So there's 30,000 people that come. That's not a lot. It's an increase of 8% of the population. We're very far from Venice or Paris or other places. So you're not there. We need tourism. We like tourism, and we actually like to use that tourism to pay back to Portuguese people. We just opened a great museum called the Jewels of the Crown Museum, where you have all the jewels of the monarchy, the Portuguese monarchy, where we paid 30 million out of the tourism tax that we get from tourists. So if you get tourism working for people, and if you get people to live in a city that is clean because tourists pay for cleaning the city, then you have this harmony. But it's about diversifying. It's like investments. You have to diversify.
You're enjoying the job? Because
I
when
love
we met in October and you'd just sort of taken office, and I sort of wondered, were you starting to wonder what you got into?
I love the job because it's a proximity job.
Right.
And you can really solve problems of the people in a very, very concrete way, when people are on the street, when you do things that change the lives of people, and you do it as a mayor. So it's an amazing job, and I love it. And I love that you're here, and you should be, and you should come and live here.
Quest means Lisbon. I foresee it. Well, there you are. The mayor's invited me to come and live here. I wonder what my husband's going to say about that. I'll probably agree with you. Thank you very much. Good to see you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much indeed. Now, as we continue, now, our top story tonight, look, showing you the markets and how they are trading. It is really weird the way the markets are embracing almost the height of the day after the Fed decision. Jerome Powell's press conference has ended. The Fed's raised rates by the most since 1994. Matt Egan is our correspondent. He is at the Fed in Washington. So, yeah, there's the headline number, Matt Egan, of 75 basis points. Then you've got this, it's quite strange, what are they going to do in future? And the markets seem to like it. What's going on?
Well, Richard, we clearly are dealing with a historic inflation crisis here in the United States. And today, the Federal Reserve took a dramatic step towards trying to put this inflation fire out. You know, Jerome Powell doing his best impression of Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan by dramatically raising interest rates. And so that means borrowing costs are going to be going up. And I think that in some ways, this was an admission by the Fed that not only have they been behind the curve on inflation, but they actually remain behind the curve. Because it was just 6 weeks ago that Jerome Powell said that a 75 basis point move was not something they were actively considering, and now they're doing it. And that's because the inflation reports in the last few days have just come out so alarmingly hot. Jerome Powell was asked kind of what changed, and he said first the Friday consumer price report in the United States, the worst since 1981, and then he also pointed to some consumer inflation expectations numbers that caught the Fed's eye. So you put it together, and they decided Richard, they had to move faster than they anticipated to just a few days ago.
So. Right. I mean, at least no one can say that the Fed isn't being data dependent. They've always said they would be, and they seem to be following through on that. But the market going up sharply. Now, I know we could have a knee-jerk and it could all reverse tomorrow. There's this theory Rahel was saying earlier that they'd rather have a recession than inflation. I get that, but even so.
It is an interesting reaction from the market. Let's remember the markets fell very sharply into a bear market because of concerns about just how hot inflation is. And I think what's happened is we've had a shift. For the longest time, the concern on Wall Street was that the Fed was going to take away the easy money punch bowl, and that was going to be bad for stock prices. But we're past that, right? I mean, that's already happened. The actual big fear, I think, on Wall Street is that inflation is completely out of control and the Fed is not on top of it. So from that perspective, the fact that the Fed is taking an aggressive step today and signaling big rate increases to come in the next few months, I think that that shows that they are taking this seriously and that perhaps they can try to get inflation back towards something near healthier levels in the quarters to come, Richard.
Matt Egan, who's at the Fed in Washington. Matt, thank you. Now, during the course of the programme, you will have heard planes going overhead, leaving Portugal Airport, leaving Lisbon's airport. Well, one person has been watching them closely, the CEO of TAP, Portuguese Airlines. After the break, we'll talk to her about the summer travel season. How is it going to go? Will it get worse? Can travellers expect misery or pleasure? In a moment.
Wherever you go in the world, one airline goes further to make it feel exceptional. Qatar Airways, going places together.
Almost all carbon emissions come from industries that shape our world. But at Standard Chartered, we believe progress doesn't have to cost our planet. That's why we're mobilizing $300 billion to help our clients change the way they operate, accelerating the transition to a net zero world. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
Bring the energy.
Welcome to the draft.
Aramco Team Series London goes to Team Talent.
3 pros, 1 amateur. Let's go.
Mainland China tolerates no signs of dissent whatsoever.
Are you anticipating dozens of people being prosecuted? Hundreds? Thousands?
Stories of mass internment camps have been trickling out.
Do you think you'll see your husband again?
this period of mourning is taking place in a real climate of fear. The humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in front of our eyes here. This is one of the cells. Come on in here. We're flying over ISIS front lines. This is the only protection we have. The nerves are still very much on edge. Firefighters have been battling this blaze for weeks. What do you say to people who question climate change?
We need to do something now.
Ivan Watson, CNN.
Magnificent views tonight from Lisbon. What a fantastic capital city. We're delighted to be here. Now, the travel dysfunction for holidaymakers over the summer, well, it doesn't look like it's going to be much fun. The industry's recovery is very much in question as a result of so many staff shortages, infrastructure problems that has beset us so far. Tourism is critical to the Portuguese economy. The World Travel and Tourism Council says it accounted for 10% of the 2021 GDP. That's 900,000 jobs. International visitors spent more than 12 billion last year. With me is Christine Omier-Rina, the CEO of TAP Air Portugal. How good to see you. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
What's gone wrong? Why are travellers having such problems, and what can you do about it?
I think that our industry is a very complex industry with many players that have to be aligned, and also plan for the growth. So, for instance, we are flying 90% of our capacity compared to 19. So it's a significant growth compared to last year. And all the players have to ramp up, and some of them had difficulty to recruit the right number of people, because the market could be competitive, etc. So I think we are facing a recovery period that is quite challenging.
Do you think it's going to get worse over the summer as numbers increase, or are you hopeful that you'll be able to get it back under control?
I think some of the players already took measure. Here in Portugal, we have done a lot with all the stakeholders. But I think it's for some, being more, putting more effort in recruitment, some others, changing processes. So we are all trying to find a solution. June was the start of the real peak for the summer for us, so we will have the same capacity in July. So we think that we learn a lot in June. And it's true that for some customers it has been very challenging.
I was reading your evidence to the Parliamentary Committee, and the restructuring of TAP is underway. But what will TAP be when you've finished?
I think we have a plan till 2025, and the plan is about an airline of 99 aircraft and sustainably profitable airline. So that's all objective of this plan, making TAP a profitable and sustainable business by the end of the plan.
I guess the skeptics say you can do it and it's possible to be done, but it's going to be very difficult, and that ultimately, you're going to be hemmed in by the big three groups and throttled by the low-cost carriers.
Well,
you've heard all this before.
I think that in our industry it's difficult to see any easy projects because of the competitivity of what we are living every day, but also what we have been living since last year. And with the war in Ukraine, we have costs increasing, such as fuel, that is now at level since last weekend, again very high. But we have many challenges. So I think for us it's more all these external factors that are a little bit headwinds for us.
Right, but there'll always be external factors. Can you say whether these externals have so far derailed your plan?
So far not, because like all our peers in the industry, as you know, after the increase of fuel costs, we have been increasing some prices, and we've done, reacted, and be following what our competitors have been doing in the industry. On other, external factors such as foreign exchange, we are trying to find mitigation. So far, we are on track with our plan.
You're enjoying it. I mean, after the bruising Flybe and all of that took place before that, and then coming here and another major restructuring.
I think I like challenges, but being in this country, discovering Portugal, right. It's wonderful. So it's a big challenge, but I think with my team and with all our employees, I think it's wonderful.
I cannot believe what You brought me these?
Yes, I know that you like them very much. And it's about our Portuguese experience on board and our wonderful pastel nata. So I'm sure you will have one, because I think it's definitely part of what the Portuguese culture provides to the world. An excellent experience.
One
or more.
One or more. You can never have just one. A challenge, I guarantee you. You can never have just one. My blood sugar, my glucose monitor. Well, I'll look after these.
Okay.
Don't let me just. You don't
Thank
want.
you.
You don't want these. Thank you. I'll take care of these for the time being, and give them a good home. Now they call them e-bikes or e-scooters. They are electric, quite literally, and they are everywhere. After the break, what they mean, and really, are they just a bloody nuisance, or are they the best thing since sliced bread?
I'm CNN meteorologist Chad Myers with your Copernicus Climate Change Summary for May of 2022. A couple areas of note here on the big picture. The blue area here, the cold water of La Nina, and a very warm May across parts of Russia. Also a very warm May across parts of France. But overall, the globe was 1.2 degrees C above where we were before the Industrial Revolution. Now focusing on France, the warmest May on record since 1900, since they've been keeping track of records. Also very warm across the Iberian Peninsula as well. Not only warm, but very dry, setting the stage for wildfires that are in fact in Spain already happening in places, also into parts of Portugal, and the potential for other places that really didn't see much rainfall at all in May.
On the next Living Golf, discover the history of the sport in Sweden. How do they keep producing some of the world's best golfers? Hear from rising stars.
I think it's just more fun when a Swede wins.
Then visit the region's flagship event, the Scandinavian Mixed, and sit down with Europe's next Ryder Cup captain, Henrik Stenson.
This is where it all started for me.
Living Golf, Saturday on CNN, in association with Gulf Saudi. Transformation, technology, new Marketplace Europe.
A Davos of difference, a WEF like no other, as leaders face historic crises.
Marketplace Europe, Sunday on CNN.
When you follow a story, you may be asked to take risks.
These protests are a test for Hamas.
Where Iraqi troops would pre-position and these Americans would advise them.
The protesters are just outside a military base. They're throwing rocks.
Any understanding between Israel and Gaza could quickly fall apart again.
You witness persistence, and that's where change happens.
The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
He's interviewed 5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smerconish, Saturday on CNN.
First it was the same app you use for Uber or ride shares, and now it's the same app for e-scooters. They are everywhere, and I was not going to be left out. Oh, this is just... You talk about the change in how times have changed. I mean, same app, multiple cities, and off we go. Enormous fun, the ability to rent an e-bike in any city. But what about all those e-scooters littering the city? And honestly, who's wearing a helmet? They are everywhere. They are littering the cities. They are abandoned. They are dropped. The batteries have run out. And yet, everybody is using them.